The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news for the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favour. Jesus chose these words from Isaiah 61 to begin his public ministry. Justice is at the heart of his life and mission. He heard the cry of the afflicted and took the material conditions of the oppressed seriously, calling us to do the same. We are 4 days from the first anniversary of the first national lockdown. We are currently enduring our third. Hope does finally seem to be on the horizon for many, and yet, as we begin to be able to imagine a future once more, we must not forget the systemic injustices we have witnessed in this past year of pandemic. Because while the pandemic's been a collective experience, it has not been an equitable one. Rather, it has exposed and exacerbated fault lines of inequality along the lines of race and class in our society. A disproportionately high number of Black, Asian and ethnic minority people have died. 70,000 people have been made homeless, and rates of domestic violence have soared. All the while, certain circles, often close to government ministers, have been profiting lucratively. While we're all experiencing the same pandemic, our experiences are certainly not the same. And so, shouldn't we at least ask if the scale of our current crisis, with a second peak higher and more deadly than the first, is at least in part due to a political imagination that prioritises profit over people during a pandemic? Now, it's natural when faced with suffering of this scale that we want to avert our eyes or look for easy answers. As Christians, we might want to reach for a redemptive narrative, give the government some grace, pray for unity, or avoid mixing religion and politics altogether. And yet, with Simone Weil, a Christian mystic and political activist who herself was thinking and writing during a different period of crisis in the 1930s, I want to invite us to resist these urges. Because excusing a political imagination that oppresses the already marginalised risks minimising and perpetuating their affliction. Seeking unity without repentance or reparations is dangerous and risks propagating injustice. You see, politics is more than policies and Westminster debates. It is a practice of the imagination. And this imagination tells a story about our society, and it forms the structures upon which our society is built. Theologically, this really matters because it reflects how we see God's children and it affects how we treat one another. Now, the current political imagination has led to us clapping for our NHS heroes and then failing to give them a pay rise in real terms. It's led to private companies profiting over providing faulty PPE and failing to track and trace. It's left Marcus Rashford fighting for school children to be fed. And we've all seen the food parcels that the company Chartwell's provided, with red peppers cut in half and food packaged in coin bags. If we seek unity without challenging this political imagination, nothing's going to change. In fact, if we look at the increase in inequality since the financial crisis or during the pandemic so far, things will likely get worse. So instead, I want to invite us with Simone Weil to follow in Jesus' footsteps in paying attention. Attention, according to Weil, is born of love. It is the highest and rarest form of generosity. In a sense, it is prayer. Attention is the way of Jesus. He heard the cry of blind Bartimaeus, noticed the woman bent double at the back of the synagogue, felt the touch of the woman who was bleeding in the crowd who reached for his cloak. In each case, he paid attention to their affliction, met their material need, and ruptured the political imagination that would deny their worth. You see, Jesus is never and never has been on the side of oppression. But Christianity and Christians, particularly in the West, often have and continue to be. We need to recognise this and actively interrogate it, admitting where we are implicated. Now, Vey knows that we naturally recoil at such stark realities, looking for surface-level solutions to dilute our despair, because at our sacred core, we are creatures who relentlessly hope for the good, and it actually hurts us when we see the opposite occurring. But if we are to resist perpetuating affliction, we need to pay attention. Vey says it's actually only through God's grace that this is possible. As we consent to God's grace, he transforms us into his likeness, and we are able to attend to the world and to suffering with love. As we do this, we mirror God's loving regard towards us. And so, though fatigued, if we are to avoid maintaining the status quo, we need to pay attention. We must notice the malignant forces within and without the church that propagate injustice. As we reckon with the scale of injustice, we rupture the dominion of these forces and create spaces where we might contend with reality. Now, it's going to feel risky, particularly in a world where those who refuse to do the work, they're going to act quicker. But if we're to resist plastering over the pain in the name of unity, we must remain attentive. Here we might have to admit that we don't have the answers, that we're baffled, in pain, implicated. Instead of rushing to solutions, we might let our attention to affliction affect us, admitting that even this being a choice is a privilege. We might allow frustration, anger, even despair to arise, because it's here at the end of ourselves that we encounter God and we begin to encounter others beyond ourselves to whom we might turn. For there are people who are well practiced in the art of attention to affliction to whom we might turn. Those who existed before this particular crisis as prophetic voices of liberation. Those who are well acquainted with suffering, who have fought to become articulate, to imagine a life and a politics capable of love and justice. Learning from their leading, we might develop a political imagination that is rooted in solidarity, founded in God's grace, and reflecting the heart of Jesus. Now, this does not look like individual actions. Instead, recognizing the systemic reality of the injustices we face, we might build Christian communities of sanctuary, of solidarity, of resistance. It might look like turning over some tables. Because the political imagination that fails to resist structural injustice is not true to Jesus. We must admit where the church has not lived up to its vocation and recognise with hope that Jesus is leading us a different way. As we rupture the dominion of force, consenting to God's grace, we might, together, develop a Christian political imagination worthy of Christ's calling in pursuit of love and justice. Thank you.